Hey there, this is Jessica, Customer Success Team Member here at REI SIFT. Today I wanted to take a minute just to show you how lead management and sales management can work in REI SIFT. So I have set up some boards and some automations, which we call sequences, and some task follow-up to show you one scenario that would work. You can adapt this, so that's one thing to keep in mind is that, this is fully adaptable, fully customizable. So you can change a pipeline, you can change a task, you can change a sequence, you can change any part of this flow, but this is one scenario that I often set up for users that we find to be very useful and um, an excellent way to manage sales and leads in REI Sift. You'll notice here I do have sensitivity mode on. That's just so that this video does not get flagged by showing addresses and things. So that's why part of it is blurred out. All right, so to trigger lead management in SIFT, an automation that moves it into my sales and lead flow, I am going to change the status to new lead. Now I am emulating that this came in like as if it was click to call, so I'm going to manually change it. However, the same thing would happen whether it's a lead coming in from a ZAP, like a PPC lead or a PPL lead, or if it is coming in from one of our integration partners. As soon as the status changes to new lead, so let's say I made a call attempt, I called all these numbers, this one was the correct number, and the property status changes to new lead, that status changing triggers the automation. And so whether I do that manually or it comes in from another flow, that will begin the automation. So if I refresh this property and we come down here, we can see it now has a task assigned to it, and it now has been added to our pipeline or board. So if I go to SIFTline, I can now see that new lead right here in the new lead section on the board. And I can come here and call this lead and qualify it, or if you're already on the phone with it, go ahead and qualify it now. But if this came in from an integration or from PPC, you're going to be reaching out to call this lead. Now, there is a scenario where you do not get in contact with them when you first call them. So that's why we made this column here, no contact new lead. So let's say I go ahead and I do outreach today, and this becomes a no contact new lead. I didn't make contact with them. The next automation is triggered by moving the card. So I can either drag the card into the column, or when I'm in card view, I can click on the stepper here and move it into the new contact, no contact new lead, excuse me. So if I refresh that, the status will change to no contact new lead. It's just going to take it a second to display there. And I have my first no contact new lead task assigned. Now, these first three I set it up in my system, but remember it's fully customizable here, where you will get a series of three, try to re-engage that new lead that you don't have contact with. So the first three tasks will be assigned on a daily basis. So this one's due tomorrow. If I complete this one, it will assign follow-up two, due the following day. When you can see it changed the status here, and it will assign a task. We're just going to give it a second. Okay, and then follow-up two is due a day later. When I complete that one, it will assign follow-up three, due a day later. And then once follow-up three is completed, we moved it into a no contact new lead nurture sequence where you're getting a task to follow up once a week in an attempt to make contact with this lead. So I'm going to complete that. And then you can see I get a no contact new lead nurture, and it's due in a week. And if I complete that one, I would get another, it's a loop, a no contact new lead nurture. Now this will continue to be assigned every time I complete this, unless I delete the task or if I move it into another phase. So if I qualify it and move it into cold, warm, or hot, it will stop that loop of that nurture task. So let's say I complete it today. I do get them on the phone, and I qualify this one as either cold, warm, or hot based on how quickly and motivated they are to sell. It would work the same whether we do cold, warm, or hot. So for this one, I'm going to do warm. I'm going to move it into the warm lead section. That is the trigger. It will clear out the no contact new lead nurture task and instead assign a warm follow-up. And it will also change the status here to warm. It just takes it a minute to display that there. but it will also change the status to warm lead. So now I will have a task to follow up with this warm lead in 15 days. And that part would work the same whether I moved it to cold lead, warm lead, or hot lead. The only thing that would change is the status would change to the appropriate temperature, and then how soon the follow-up task is due. With cold lead, I have a 45-day follow-up that loops, warm lead, a 15-day follow-up that loops, and hot lead, a 2-day follow-up that loops. If I complete a warm lead follow-up, you are assigned another warm lead follow-up in another 15 days. And that will continue in any of these phases. It will loop until you move it out of that stage. So I can move it into send to acquisitions. If we go back out to the SIF line board here, we have some phases here. Send to acquisitions is what we're hoping for, that they're ready to hear offers, but you can also move it into not a deal, not interested anymore, became a buyer, lost deal. For the purpose of this, I'm going to move it into send to acquisitions. And once that happens, a sequence will actually fire that moves the card onto the acquisitions board in the appointment make offer column, and it completely moves that. So now the card is no longer in that send to acquisitions stage there. I also have a task on the card to make an offer. And then you can follow up with that. The rest, a lot of these other phases here don't have sequences tied to them because it depends what happens. So depending on how that offer goes, I will track the offer down here. I'm not going to get into that too much right now, but you can track the offer. And then you would move it either into offer follow-up, offer rejected, offer accepted. So depending on where you move it here, you'll assign different tasks. So these ones would be manual, but you can choose a preset like the follow-up and manually assign that depending on how it goes. And you'll keep it in this stage once it's under offer accepted. That's verbally accepted, not under contract. But once it does become under contract, you can move it into the under contract stage. That will have a sequence tied to it, which I'll show in a second. But I also want to show one other scenario. Let's say that you're making offers, and then this person, you're like, oh, they're not really on the same page. They need to be passed back down to lead management. You can click on this column here or move it into this send back to lead management column. It will get moved back onto the lead management board in the needs review stage with a task to send back to lead management. They need to review it, and then they could move it back into the appropriate phase, like maybe this is really a cold lead. So now it's back in the cold lead phase, right? And here it is. Wrong one. It's back in the cold lead phase. Moves it back to the cold lead phase with a cold lead task. You can do send back to acquisitions when it's time, and you can pass it back and forth in that way if you need to pass it back down to lead management or pass it up to lead management. Okay, and that could work for either of them. Then once it is under contract, you would move it to the under contract phase. That is going to trigger a sequence where it actually moves the card onto the transactions board with a task to process contract. Here again, you'd move it to these stages, waiting on title issues, clear to close as appropriate. And then once you do close the deal, you can move it into the closed phase. And that does change the status to closed. Once it processes here in just a second, it will display a closed status. It got under contract when I moved it here. And then now if we refresh again, it will have a closed status. And it clears out any other tasks. We'll just give it a second to display that closed status. But it will change it. Sometimes it just takes a second to display that status, but it does change the status to closed. All right, so that is a brief outline of some of the sequences and tasks and automations you can do on this board. Once it is closed under transactions, you could move the card to its appropriate, exit strategy, wholesale flip rental. You could also just copy the address and go into the wholesale board and add that address into the wholesale board as well. So you can manage these boards based on what the exit strategy is. I hope that clears up how some of the automations and tasks and things can work in SIFline. And please remember, it is fully customizable.